This will be the second video associated with answering tough questions about external stability. Question 1. Outline the relationship between the exchange rate, the current account deficit, and the accumulation of net foreign debt. So basically you can go in whatever order you want here. Generally, if Australia is able to achieve a sustainable level of net foreign debt, there is more confidence in our markets. So as soon as our net foreign debt gets out of control, our dollar will depreciate because people won't want to invest in Australia. So the higher the CAD, the more we have to borrow or sell our other nations to finance the gap between spending and income. A higher CAD will generally lead to higher net foreign debt, meaning that Australia owes the rest of the world more money. So you will explain the relationship between the CAD and net foreign debt first. If the CAD and net foreign debt are too high, international investors will lose confidence in Australia and they'll stop lending money to Australians. So we have a big CAD, we have a large level of debt, so the rest of the world goes, no, we're not going to lend money to Australia anymore. And this causes less capital inflow and the dollar will depreciate. So you've got to be able to step out the relationship between all three. A higher current account deficit means that we have to sell off more of our assets or go into more debt. If we go into astronomical amounts of debt, the rest of the world goes, no, we're not lending money to Australia anymore, and that will lead to a lack of capital inflow, and therefore the dollar will depreciate. And other people will want to, take out their assets in Australia, so there'll be more capital outflow as well. On the flip side, if the Australian dollar is too high, this can also be unfavourable for the CAD and net foreign debt as Australia becomes less internationally competitive. So you could talk about how if a high Australian dollar is bad for the CAD because we will export less and import more, so there'll be more debits and less credits. But the main relationship here is that a higher CAD leads to a higher net foreign debt, generally, if we borrow money, and that will lead to a lower dollar because people will lose faith in Australia if it gets too high. That will lead to capital outflow as well as a lack of capital inflow. Relationship between the current account and the CAFA. The higher the current account deficit, the higher the capital and financial account surplus. This is because the financial account services the current account, so the higher the deficit in the current account means we need to either borrow more money or sell more assets, causing a surplus in the financial account. So there's an opposite relationship. High current account deficit means a high current account, capital and financial account surplus. One is in deficit, one is in surplus. Difference between transactions in the CAFA, that stands for capital and financial account, and the current account. Transactions in the current account have a current nature with no future obligation. This includes foreign aid, as well as like credits and debits for exporting and importing, like minerals or tourism or any export or import you can think of. The transactions in the financial account have a future obligation, and this includes getting loans from other nations, as well as selling off equity to foreign citizens. So anything with a future obligation is in the financial account. This is a question related to free trade. So explain reasons supporting the notion that protection is a self-defeating strategy. Protection is a self-defeating strategy because protection reduces efficiency. It shouldn't say reduced inefficiency, it should say reduced efficiency. My apologies. With our local industries facing less competition, there's less pressure for them to lower their costs, which can lead to higher costs of production and reduce our international competitiveness. Foreign firms that are exposed to competition are likely to boost their efficiency, so they get more efficient, we get less efficient. They have lower prices, we have higher prices, and this will force the Australian government to increase tariffs even further so that we can protect our protect our local products, because there's such a big gap between their prices and our prices because they've been exposed to competition. And the problem with that is if we don't keep those tariffs high, they face the prospect of Australian businesses becoming uncompetitive and closing down and going broke. Why would the removal of tariffs help to improve efficiency? So again, a question related to tariffs. Lower tariffs help to improve both allocative and technical efficiency. It will mean that Australian companies are forced to compete with cheaper imports. It means that we have to become more efficient to lower our prices and production costs, otherwise we'll go out of business. So we need to increase our productivity. Again, this is all just related to like a more competitive market and how that boosts technical efficiency. Lower tariffs, though, will also force Australian businesses to focus on allocating resources to areas of comparative advantage, where we have the lower opportunity cost. So not only are we becoming more efficient because there's more competition, but also specialising in areas of comparative advantage. That's leading to increased efficiency and allows us to produce a greater volume of goods and services because we're doing what we're good at. We then trade with other nations, and therefore citizens have access to cheap goods from all around the world. They've got more choice, improving their living standards. They've got better purchasing power because prices are lower, and this will increase the overall living standards of citizens and boost allocative efficiency. So basically, have to make links to technical efficiency through increased productivity and more competition, allocative efficiency because we specialize in areas of comparative advantage and can essentially do things in bulk, cheaper, more efficiently, and we get access to more goods and services. Explain how an increase in the size of the government's budget deficit impacts on the dollar. An increase in the deficit may lead to a reduction in international confidence and unwillingness to invest in Australia. This is likely to depreciate the dollar in the long term. However, having said that, if Australia is financing our deficit by borrowing in the short term, that can actually appreciate the dollar. So it can kind of go both ways. It can depreciate the dollar in the long term if there's less willingness to lend money to Australia, but it can appreciate in the short term if we have more money coming into Australia to fund our deficits. An increase in the terms of trade impact on the Australian dollar means there's a higher demand for the Australian dollar as our exports are more popular and we receive a higher price. So they're converting more of their currency into ours when they buy our products. This will lead to an appreciation of the dollar because there's more demand for the Australian dollar. A higher terms of trade can also mean import prices are cheaper, so we might be supplying less of the Australian dollar. So there's more demand, potentially less supply, and that can help to appreciate the dollar. So the dollar would go up.